Primary production is a process where plants absorb solar energy and fix carbon in the form of sugars. So it's the basis of the food web is really carbon compounds that are used by consumers and decomposers. So carbon is at the heart of all life forms on Earth. Some people think perhaps silicon is the basis of life forms on other planets, but here on Earth, carbon is key to almost all forms of life. Perhaps the deep sea vents don't use carbon, I'm not sure, but I would think they probably would. Carbon is the duct tape of life. It has these four arms, essentially, valences that connect to many, many different elements. So carbon just can hook things together, lots of different things. It can also form long chains. And so it's a very versatile element and essential to life on Earth. So primary producers, so keep thinking when you hear primary producers, those are basically plants. Phytoplankton are single-celled plants that float in the ocean. And then we have the tertiary plants, as well as other seaweeds and plants in the ocean, as well as aquatic organisms. So solar energy starts the process. And I'm sure you've all heard of chlorophyll that's in plants. And when the sun shines on chlorophyll, it allows a chemical process to occur that fixes carbon in a form that you and I can use, and the tree or the plant can also use for its energy. So a plant takes A and B and turns it into X and Y. And A and B are two compounds, and it turns those two compounds into something else. And do you know what those are? And do I have it? So here it's carbon dioxide. I didn't know if I had a slide for it. Carbon dioxide and water is turned into sugar and oxygen. So that's the formula for photosynthesis. And it happens with chlorophyll in the presence of sunlight. So in the dark, photosynthesis is not happening. Carbon dioxide and water, it turns into sugar and oxygen. Carbon dioxide and water are both pretty plentiful in the environment. Certainly carbon dioxide is, and water in most places isn't too hard to get. Then sugar is the main food for all organisms, including trees. You'll have sugars broken apart and built up into more complex carbohydrates, but they're the basis of it. And then oxygen that we, of course, breathe. So the oxygen on our planet came from plants. And here we have carbon dioxide are inputs and sugar and oxygen are outputs. And that's one way in which plants have drastically changed Earth, that there is some oxygen present on other planets, but because we have plants, the oxygen in our atmosphere is far higher, which is a good thing for organisms like us who breathe the oxygen. Now, so here essentially light solar energy is changed into chemical energy in the form of sugars. Then when we eat the sugar, we can use that for energy, just to burn the calories to run our bodies. We can also use it to build muscles and other tissues in our bodies. And of course, we breathe the oxygen. So here's a diagram of a chloroplast that is present in the plant cells, and the cells that are visible, that are exposed to light. And they're ancient cyanobacteria that have taken up residence inside the cells. This was fairly new, where people realized it's actually cyanobacteria present in the cell. That's from just the 1970s, which seems new to me, fairly recent to me, that took up residence in the plant cell. So it provides the photosynthesis to help the plant, and the plant in turn can provide water and nutrients to help make the chloroplast. Here's another diagram of photosynthesis. You see water coming up through the tree and flowing into the leaf. Then, so that we have the water, we get the carbon dioxide out of the air. Chlorophyll absorbs the solar energy and and this happens in the chloroplast. Then sugar and oxygen are produced. The oxygen is given off into the air, and it goes round and round. Now, the plant itself uses oxygen for respiration, but it also gives off extra that we can use. So just imagine how this works. Number one would be what? What would be coming in from high in the sky? Well, that's pretty obviously light energy. What would be coming in to this process from the air? That's carbon dioxide. So one thing you'll notice right away is that the plant is fixing carbon dioxide. It's taking it out of the air and putting it into plant tissues and sugar to use for energy. That means that plants are a major way in which we have carbon fixed and takes out of the atmosphere and puts it in a form that is locked up, so it's not out there to raise the temperature of the planet. That's why we feel that planting forests is one way to lock away carbon dioxide. So we take carbon dioxide and light and also water, and that goes into photosynthesis. It produces what product that's useful for energy and tissue growth? That is our sugars, i.e. glucose. That's the same thing. And then another product goes off into the atmosphere. So what would that be? That would be oxygen. And then finally, other things are needed for tissue growth, but not for energy. And not much of these nutrients are needed. So inorganic material, nitrates, potassium phosphate, those come from the soil, but not as much as you would think. The bulk of the mass of a tree, like 98% of the mass of the tree, comes just from carbon dioxide and water. That's pretty amazing. You take air and water and mix them in this magic process called photosynthesis and produce something as big as a redwood tree. Okay, so photosynthesis and respiration are opposites, which is a beautiful cycle. Now, nature is full of cycles, and this is how we recycle things, or nature does. So we have photosynthesis, taking carbon dioxide and water in, and the presence of light energy would produce sugar and oxygen. Then the sugar and oxygen are used by cells for energy and tissue growth, and we exhale carbon dioxide and water. And this goes round and round. The plant itself also has both respiration and photosynthesis, and they're opposite. Cell respiration and photosynthesis are opposite processes, so that it can just recycle it. Phytoplankton are responsible for 50% of the world's photosynthesis. That's an enormous amount. They're extremely important, and they're just one-celled plants that float in the ocean. Here's another picture of them. Many of them are extremely beautiful. And phytoplankton means drifting plants. They're primarily in the ocean, and we have them to thank for most of our oxygen. We wouldn't be able to breathe very well if phytoplankton were taken out of the system. So it's 50% of the world's oxygen. They float near the surface. Microscopic single-celled plants, and they are essentially the grass of the sea. And where they grow, there's lots of food for other organisms. They form the base of the ocean food chain. So here you can see the red areas are where phytoplankton are most concentrated. They tend to be in colder waters and areas of upwelling. So you can see there at the mouth of the Amazon and up around Alaska, the Baltic Sea, and other areas where they're particularly thick. They're mostly thick in the northern hemisphere. So prevalent in cold waters. But a warm, acidic ocean may have reduced this by 40% since 1950. So we may be having a very big impact on phytoplankton, which is not good for either food chains that depend upon them, as they're the basis of the ocean food chain, or for our planetary oxygen. The entire ocean food chain depends on phytoplankton. Phytoplankton feeds zooplankton that feed tiny, like krill, and on up the food chain to something as big as a walrus here. This is taken on St. Lawrence Island, where they harvest a few walrus to feed the whole village. This is another source of oxygen. The primary producer number 2 is tropical rainforests. Beautiful forests. Tropical ones are, rainforests, are responsible for 28% of terrestrial photosynthesis, even though they cover only 5% of the Earth's land area. So we're cutting tropical forests down at a tremendous rate. It has slowed down recently. Even Brazil is recognizing that, maybe it better protect its forests. Recently, they've been trying to control the harvest of trees in the Amazon basin. But we have to protect these forests because they are so important for the world's oxygen supply and for taking up carbon out of the atmosphere. One of the, you hear about global warming, one of the big sources of carbon dioxide is just cutting trees down. So instead of taking up the carbon and making plant tissues out of it, we're cutting the trees down so that then that carbon is free to be in the atmosphere instead, and that's not where we want it to be.